I am sorry you feel that way. I think a lot of us have heard this phrase before, and a lot of us know that it's a toxic phrase. But why? Not many people understand why it's such a toxic phrase. So in this video, I want to break down why I'm sorry you feel that way and its variants are so toxic, why we should always avoid using them, and what we can do instead. A lot of people recoil at the sound of this phrase, I'm sorry you feel that way. Some people don't. In fact, some people use that phrase without knowing the impact that it can have on people. But generally, a lot of people know this phrase to be somewhat toxic, somewhat damaging to relationships. So I want to break down why is this phrase specifically so damaging. So I want to start by saying that this video isn't a judgment on anyone using this phrase specifically. Sometimes in life, we can say things from a place of good intent and it comes off very badly or has a huge impact on people's feelings. And I also want people watching this video to try and remove their judgment of the people that are using this phrase as well. It can be very easy in the moment to assume people's intent is to hurt, but the truth is that sometimes people can say things that they don't realize has an impact on other people. So if you're watching this video and you've had someone say this to you, I don't want you to think of them as a bad person. I don't want you to think of them as someone who has ill intent and is trying to hurt you. I want you to try to separate your feelings from the phrase itself a little bit, just as we break it down. So I really want to start by looking at some variations of this. There's the classic, I'm sorry you feel that way. Classic empty apology. But there's also things like, I'm sorry you took it that way. Or I'm sorry you're so sensitive. Or I'm sorry that you're offended. And then there's, I'm sorry you feel neglected. I'm sorry you feel unloved. I'm sorry that you feel XYZ. Or then there's, I'm sorry that you think that I'm the bad guy here. There can be a lot of variations on this phrase specifically, but all of them share the same DNA. They avoid responsibility. They put the burden on the other person and they invalidate the actual hurt. So when you look at an apology and what it's supposed to do, it actually does the opposite. It is the anti-apology. So I want to break down why these phrases are toxic and hurt relationships. So the first point is that it is not a real apology. It is a non-apology, an anti-apology. So a true apology usually contains 4 parts. There's acknowledgement of harm, there's responsibility, there's remorse, and then there's usually an offer to repair. So saying, I'm sorry you feel that way, it skips every single one of these. It gives the appearance of empathy, the appearance of responsibility, the appearance of remorse, and the appearance of the suggestion that maybe there's some repair there. But it is not true empathy. It communicates your feelings are the problem, not my actions. And there's been studies on apology effectiveness here that show that apologies lacking any sort of responsibility actually worsen the conflict instead of repairing it. And over time, these non-apologies, these anti-apologies end up eroding credibility and sincerity and ultimately push relationships further and further apart. But one of the main reasons why this specifically is so toxic is that it invalidates the other person's feelings, your partner's feelings, your friend's feelings, whoever it is. Emotional invalidation. So emotional invalidation is when somebody dismisses or ignores or minimizes somebody else's emotional experience. Validation is at the core of human connection. And there's been a lot of research that shows that invalidation, not acknowledging that you understand why someone would feel the way that they feel, ends up increasing distress, shame, anger. And again, it pushes the relationship further and further away. So by framing this issue, by saying, I'm sorry you feel that way, as just the other person's feelings, you're essentially saying your emotions aren't really legitimate and they don't matter to me. This ultimately creates an environment where the hurt person, the partner, your friend, whatever, feels unseen, feels unsupported, and this makes the relationship less safe for emotional honesty. Now, if you're regular on my channel, you'll know I talk a lot about this emotional safety, this environment to share your feelings without negative consequences. And this is crucial for every relationship. But another reason why I'm sorry you feel that way is so toxic and damaging is that it shifts blame onto the other person instead of addressing what you did, your actions. The phrase makes the other person's reaction the focus. It shifts the focus away from yourself and onto somebody else. And this is what a lot of psychologists call deflection. This is a defensive communication. Deflection avoids any real self-examination, any real reflection on your actions, the impact of your actions, and it ultimately keeps you in the right. It makes this a war against the other person. And the underlying message of this becomes, again, if you weren't so sensitive, this wouldn't be a problem. You are creating this problem. And this ultimately fosters resentment, because the person who is feeling the way that they're feeling not only has to deal with the original harm, but now feels blamed for even bringing it up. And this damages emotional safety more and more, ultimately breaking down the relationship. But worse than that, it actually kind of short circuits repair and ultimately escalates the situation. So in relationships, there are emotional and logical challenges. My members and I call them discords. These are points of connection, and creating these points of connection is one of the most important factors in creating a healthy long-term relationship. So when you're trying to cultivate this connection, when you're trying to overcome this relationship challenge, when you're trying to fix this discord, these attempts in themselves de-escalate conflict. It's ultimately moving towards resolution. So when you're saying, I'm sorry you feel that way, this is the opposite. This blocks repair. This actually creates a larger distance between you both. Because when the hurt person feels dismissed, then things can escalate. They can feel like they need to get louder, angrier, they feel worse, or they can withdraw, they can shut down. But either way, it deepens that rift instead of bridging it. So it creates more of a chasm rather than a bridge across it. But worst of all is that saying I'm sorry you feel that way can feel like emotional gaslighting. Gaslighting, for those who don't know, is when somebody manipulates you into questioning your own reality. So again, I want to really stress this, that just because someone says this doesn't mean that is their intent. In fact, I've done a much deeper dive on gaslighting specifically, which I'll link to up above and in the description down below. So oftentimes it's not people's intent to gaslight, but it can definitely feel that way. So if you're saying, I'm sorry you feel that way, again, this doesn't mean that it's intentional gaslighting, but it can be received that way by other people, because the message implies the problem that you're pointing out is not the problem, it's your perception of it. It's your interpretation of it. That is the problem. And if this is said over time and repeated over time, this is constant chronic invalidation. And this can make people feel gaslit, make them doubt their own emotional accuracy, make them worry that maybe my perception of the world isn't accurate. Maybe my emotions are invalid. So even though the intent may not be to gaslight, it can still land that way and can make people question their own perception of the world, which is the same effect as actively being gaslit, which sucks, right? Long term, this kind of response, this saying, I'm sorry you feel that way, or the variants of it, it can have the influence that people stop trusting their own instincts and start to silence themselves, stop listening to their thoughts, stop trusting their gut and questioning their own sort of sanity. But worst of all, the impact on any relationship from this phrase is that it damages trust over time. So one of the core components of trust in relationships is reliability, is consistency. So in order to show up reliably in a relationship, there needs to be a process that when harm happens, when someone's feelings get hurt, it's going to be acknowledged and it's going to be repaired. So when you're using this phrase, it avoids any responsibility. It takes yourself out of the equation and trust gets eroded because you're not showing up when it matters the most. So the person who's had their feelings hurt, your partner, friend, whoever it is, can start to think to themselves that even when their actions have had an impact on my feelings, they're never going to own it. They're never going to admit that their actions have any sort of impact on my feelings. And over time, this creates what we call expectancy bias. So expectancy bias is where the person who's been hurt starts to interpret even neutral or positive actions through a lens of distrust. So because trust has started to be broken over time, they can start to interpret all actions through distrust because they expect you to not have their best interests at heart. They expect you to have maybe ill intent. But most of all, saying this signals very low empathy. So empathy is the ability to be able to connect with and reflect another person's feelings, be able to understand, put yourself in their shoes and understand why they feel the way that they feel. So by saying, I'm sorry that you feel that way, tells the person hurt, let's say it's your partner, that you are lacking in empathy. So if you use this phrase yourself, again, I want to be clear that I'm not judging you. I'm not telling you your intent, but what can we do instead? What phrase can we use instead that actually work as an apology? Apologies work when they include very clear elements: expressing regret, acknowledging what you did, accepting responsibility, and offering repair. So even the shortest apologies that are honest are better than dodging any sort of responsibility. So obviously this is part of a larger topic, and I can only go so far in just a short YouTube video. But if you do want to dig deeper into relationships, understanding the core elements of relationships, when I spoke about emotional safety as an example, if you want to dig deeper into these core elements, then join my Relationship Bootcamp, where you'll learn the same steps and tools that all my members start with to start building, growing, and repairing long-term relationships. So I want to dig into what are some alternatives that we can say. How can we replace this phrase with something a lot stronger and a lot better for rebuilding the connection? We can acknowledge the person's feelings. That's the very first step. I can totally understand why you would be upset right now. I'd feel the same way too. Next, we can take responsibility for our actions. Taking responsibility for your actions is understanding the impact that your actions have. It's not saying that you're a bad person. It's not saying that your intent was to hurt, but it's understanding the influence that all of our actions have in the world. Just because it wasn't our intent to hurt doesn't mean that it didn't have that impact on somebody else's feelings. So we can say, you know, I can totally understand how my actions would have made you feel hurt. And I want to let you know that I am sorry. But then we can offer repair. Now, a lot of people would jump into fixes here. Would jump into a potential solution or just say, how can I fix this? However, I would suggest something different. Oftentimes when it comes to people being hurt, one conversation, one acknowledgement, oftentimes when it comes to the process of repair, it can be very easy to jump into fixes. But the truth is that repairing feelings isn't done in one conversation. So offering a fix in one conversation kind of skips over the awkward bit, which is allowing the other person to continue to express how they feel. This is one of the most crucial concepts when it comes to conflict, is understanding that repair from conflict, from hurt feelings, doesn't come in one conversation. It actually comes over many, many different conversations, and jumping in with a specific offer to repair can actually cause more damage. Ultimately, when it comes to the process of repair, it happens over a long period of time, over multiple conversations. So I wouldn't offer a specific fix. I wouldn't make some promise to fix this situation, because the fact is it's already happened and it's in the past. But it doesn't mean that you can't put in processes in place in order to prevent this happening in the future. And that's very different. Once you start looking at relationships in a systems way rather than a fixed way, then it becomes very different. I've actually done a deeper dive video on this, on seeing relationships as systems rather than a series of goals. Once you get this idea out of your mind of these fixes, of these logical goals, and into more systemic thinking within the relationships, it becomes a lot easier to actually repair the relationship long term. So if that sounds confusing to you right now, don't worry about it. I've got a much deeper dive video on it, which I'll link to on the screen. So I'll leave you with that, and I will see you over there.